Welcome to my channel, The Human Frontier. The day the infertile alien princess was given to a human, the entire galaxy whispered that it was the most polite exile ever invented. I remember the silence in the ceremonial hall. It was not peaceful silence. It was the kind that hides embarrassment. The royal council stood in long silver robes, their glowing eyes carefully avoiding the young princess standing at the center of the room. Princess Lyra had never cried in public before, but that day her hands trembled so softly that only those standing close could see. For generations, the royal bloodline of her world had been sacred. Every princess was expected to produce heirs whose abilities shaped the strength of the empire. Lyra, however, had been declared infertile after years of medical trials. No child. No successor. No future role in the long royal line. In their culture, this was not just a personal tragedy. It was considered a weakness that could threaten the stability of the throne. So the council decided something that sounded generous but was quietly cruel. She would be gifted to a human diplomat from a distant frontier colony. A symbolic union, they called it. A gesture of friendship between species. In truth, it removed a problem from the palace without public scandal. The human chosen for this strange arrangement was Commander Elias Rowan. He was known for surviving impossible wars, yet he had a reputation for kindness that many soldiers never develop. When he stepped into the hall, he did not bow immediately. Instead, he looked directly at the princess, not with pity, but with calm curiosity. That alone shocked the court. Lyra expected humiliation. She expected him to look relieved that she could never bear children, that she came with no expectations. Instead, he spoke gently. "If this union is forced on you," he said quietly, "I will refuse it." That sentence traveled through the chamber like a wave of cold air. No one had ever spoken to the royal council like that. Lyra lifted her eyes for the first time and studied him. He was not afraid. Not of the empire, not of the nobles, not even of her. "It is not forced," she replied after a moment. "It is decided." Their marriage ceremony lasted only 6 minutes. No celebration followed. No royal music. Only official signatures and polite applause. By sunset, the princess who once lived inside a palace of crystal towers boarded a human transport ship heading toward the edge of mapped space. Many believed she would disappear quietly there, living the rest of her life as a forgotten diplomatic symbol. They were wrong. Part 2. Life on the frontier colony was nothing like the royal world Lyra had grown up in. The air did not glow softly at night. The streets were not polished crystal. Wind carried dust across metal rooftops, and the stars seemed closer, sharper, almost dangerous. At first, she felt like a fragile statue placed in the middle of a storm. Commander Elias did something unexpected. He never treated her like a political burden. Instead, he showed her everything: the food markets, the engineering bays, the small schools where children of many species studied together. No one bowed to her there. No one whispered about her infertility. Most people simply greeted her with friendly curiosity. For weeks, Lyra waited for the moment he would finally speak about heirs, about expectations, about the future. That moment never came. One evening, she finally asked him, "Do you not care that I cannot give you a child?" Elias leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully before answering. "On my world, a family is not built from what someone can produce. It is built from who they choose to protect." That answer confused her more than anything else. Protection had always been the duty of soldiers and rulers, not families. Yet slowly, she began to understand his meaning. Elias protected his colony, his crew, even strangers passing through space routes. His strength was not tied to bloodlines. Months passed. Lyra began studying human medical systems, partly from curiosity and partly because she wanted something meaningful to do. Alien medicine was far more advanced than human science in many ways, yet she noticed something unusual. Human genetic therapy focused on adaptation rather than perfection. Their doctors believed that even conditions considered permanent might be altered through experimental regeneration methods. At first, she studied quietly, not telling Elias. She did not want to raise false hope inside herself. But a small idea began growing, fragile and dangerous. What if the diagnosis from her empire had not been absolute? Her people had declared her infertile using technologies designed for their own species. Human biology operated differently. Their regenerative systems, their adaptive cell structures, their experimental therapies, all of it followed different principles. For the first time in her life, Lyra wondered whether the truth about her condition had never been fully explored. One night, she finally told Elias what she was thinking. She expected hesitation. She expected him to warn her not to risk disappointment. Instead, he said, "Then we test it. Quietly. Carefully. And whatever the result, you are still you." Those words felt warmer than any royal promise she had ever heard. Part 3. The medical trials began in secret. Not because the colony was ashamed, but because Lyra feared that if her empire learned of the attempt, they would interfere. The doctors used hybrid technology, alien genetic mapping combined with human adaptive therapy. The process was slow, delicate, and filled with uncertainty. Weeks turned into months. Some treatments failed. Others showed minor improvement. Each small result felt like walking across thin glass, never knowing when hope might crack beneath her feet. Elias remained steady through all of it. He never pressured her. Never asked about progress unless she chose to speak. Then, one morning, the lead physician requested a private meeting. Lyra entered the room expecting another technical report. Instead, the doctor's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "The regeneration process has succeeded beyond expectation. Your reproductive system is now fully functional." For several seconds, Lyra could not move. She had spent years believing a door in her life had been permanently sealed. Now someone had quietly opened it. She did not celebrate immediately. She walked outside the medical center, stood under the harsh frontier sunlight, and breathed slowly. The wind smelled of metal and distant rain. She realized something important at that moment. She was not happy because she could now produce an heir. She was happy because the decision about her future finally belonged to her. When she told Elias, he did not shout or laugh. He simply smiled, the same calm smile he had shown the day they first met. "Whatever you choose next," he said, "we choose it together." Their child was conceived months later, not as a political necessity, not as a royal command, but as a shared decision made in quiet happiness. Yet news travels quickly across the stars. Before the child was even born, the royal empire that had once quietly exiled its infertile princess began sending messages requesting her return. At first, they were polite invitations. Then they became urgent diplomatic communications. Finally, an official royal fleet appeared near the colony's orbit, requesting immediate audience. The empire wanted its princess back. Part 4. The day Lyra stepped onto the landing platform to face the arriving royal delegation, the entire colony gathered behind her. She was no longer the uncertain princess who had left the palace in silence. She stood calmly, one hand resting over the gentle curve of her pregnancy, her eyes steady and clear. The royal envoys bowed deeply, something they had never done for her before. Their leader spoke carefully. "The council requests your return to the capital. The empire wishes to welcome you home." Lyra understood what they truly meant. Now that she carried a child, she had value again in their eyes. For a moment, old memories rose inside her. The cold palace halls, the whispers, the polite exile disguised as diplomacy. Elias stood beside her but did not speak. He knew the decision had to be hers alone. She looked at the envoys and answered softly, yet every word carried across the platform. I will return, but not as the princess you sent away. Weeks later, the royal capital prepared for her arrival. Crowds filled the grand ceremonial avenue, expecting a quiet reconciliation. Instead, they saw something entirely different. Lyra stepped from the transport ship wearing simple frontier clothing rather than royal robes. Beside her walked Elias, not as a servant or diplomatic escort, but as her equal partner. Inside the great hall where she had once stood in humiliation, the council waited. Silence filled the chamber again, but this time it felt different. It was not embarrassment. It was uncertainty. Lyra spoke without bowing. You declared me broken, and you removed me to protect your traditions. Yet the people you considered primitive gave me knowledge, respect, and choice. I have returned to show you proof, not only of a child, but of a truth your empire forgot. Worth is not decided by what someone can produce. It is decided by who they become when given freedom. No one interrupted her. She continued, her voice calm. My child will know both worlds. But I will not live here as a symbol to repair your pride. I will remain where I was treated as a person before I was treated as a title. The council had no answer. They could not argue with the evidence standing before them. A princess once discarded, now strong, independent, and carrying the future they had believed impossible. When Lyra finally left the hall, she did not feel anger. Only quiet relief. The journey that began as exile had turned into something greater, the discovery that destiny is not written by royal decrees, but by the courage to step beyond them. Months later, on the frontier colony, a child was born under a sky filled with bright unfamiliar stars. The celebration was small, filled with friends rather than nobles. Elias held the newborn gently while Lyra watched, smiling with a peace she had never known inside palace walls. Far across the galaxy, the empire that once sent her away now spoke her name with respect. Not because she had returned with an heir, but because she had returned with proof that even the most powerful civilizations can be wrong, and that sometimes the person they discard becomes the one who teaches them how to change. Thank you for listening. Subscribe for more cinematic science fiction stories.